things they had in common. This is the point that David Berlinski made in his book. What did the NKVD have in common with everyone who oversaw the Gulag, the SS, the people who guarded the camps, the people who put people on trains? What did they all have in common? What did they have in common with Mao? Among other things, they had in common the fact that none of them thought that God was watching them. None of them thought that they were being observed and would be held accountable.
It doesn't help when you think God is on your side. We have just as many examples where people do it because they think God is on their side, right?
Sure.
God is watching and clapping.
I'm not denying that. I'm saying that the attempt to make this a tennis match over the 20th century is a mistake. We're still trying to... Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a general one as well as one for tonight, but the whole discussion, I mean, I said the other night in Dublin that to a great extent, when the history books are written about the period we're living in, they'll probably be described as the post-Holocaust period in history, the post-World War II era in Europe. It's still going on. So we're still going through this, trying to work out what happened. And I have to say, one thing that I, at any rate, am equally tired of is the claim that this has got to be a tennis game between the religious and the non-religious. That people say that the 20th century's crimes were committed by atheists. Sometimes true, often wrong. Or that the 20th century's crimes were committed by people who were religious. Sometimes true, often wrong.
No, but you're not observing a crucial distinction here, because I would never be tempted to hold religion accountable for the bad things that religious people do that have no connection to religion, right? So if a Muslim robs a liquor store, I'm not going to blame Islam for that. Right? There's no doctrine. There's no doctrine.
Especially not then.
There's no doctrine that makes sense of that behavior. What I blame religion for, and likewise, there's no doctrine in the mere loss of religion, i.e. atheism, that gets you the gulag.
Well,
right?
hang on. Oh, there is.
No, there's not. But let me just flesh out this point for one more second. The only thing I blame religion for are the things that it becomes rational to do by the light of these beliefs. If you accept these doctrines, a rational and good person can be tempted to join ISIS. That's my concern. Okay. A rational and good person can be tempted to support the Inquisition.
But of the many things they had in common, this is the point that David Berlinski made in his book. What did the NKVD have in common with everyone who oversaw the Gulag, the SS, the people who guarded the camps, the people who put people on trains? What did they all have in common? What did they have in common with Mao? Among other things, they had in common the fact that none of them thought that God was watching them. None of them thought that they were being observed and would be held accountable.
It doesn't help when you think God is on your side. We have just as many examples where people do it because they think God is on their side, right?
Sure.
God is watching and clapping.
I'm not denying that. I'm saying that the attempt to make this a tennis match over the 20th century is a mistake. We're still trying to work out what caused it. Religion had a role, atheism had a role. But the perpetual tennis match of it, I think.
Well, and there is something to be said at a more sophisticated level, I would say, for the idea that you have an obligation to a transcendent ethic. Now, you make that claim in the moral landscape. You lay out a transcendent ethic, in my estimation. That's one that puts the onus of responsibility on the individual to act in a way that, at minimum, minimizes suffering. And you think of that as a statement of fact, that's the proper way of being, and I think about it as an axiomatic statement of faith, and that's one of our differences. But I have been very careful in my analysis of the relationship between the idea of sovereignty and the idea of religious belief. And one of the things that I have worked out, I think, partly from reading such people as Eliade and Jung, was that there is an emergent idea of sovereignty that does involve being accountable to a God. And here's how I would justify that. And I would think about this essentially from a practical and biological perspective, independent of any metaphysical reality that it might have. So the ancient Mesopotamians, for example, believed that their emperor was the incarnation or the representative of a god named Marduk. And that actually bestowed certain ethical responsibilities on the ruler. And so the ruler had to be a good Marduk in order to be a sovereign, to be regarded as sovereign. He had to be the embodiment of these divine principles. And it took the Mesopotamians a very, very long period of time, perhaps several tens of thousands of years. They weren't Mesopotamian during that whole time, obviously, to work out what those principles of sovereignty should be. And the Mesopotamians encoded this in their fictions, in their religious fictions, making essentially the proposition that the proper ruler had to have eyes all the way around his head, because that was one of the attributes of Marduk. So he was someone who was genuinely paying attention, who was capable of coming into voluntary contact with the great chaotic substructure of being and cutting it into pieces and making the habitable world, and also speaking words that were truthful, that had the power, the magic power of truth. And the ruler had to act that out if he was going to be the sort of ruler that his people weren't entitled to slay and sacrifice. And then once a year at the New Year's festival, he would go outside the city, the walled city, and he would act out his role of Marduk. And the priest would humiliate him and ask him to confess all the ways that he hadn't been a good Marduk, so that he could remember that he had a responsibility to undertake this to embody this relationship with these divine principles. And the thing that's so important about this, that's so absolutely crucially important, is that it established the principle that even if you were at the top of a hierarchy, you weren't absolute. There was something above you that you were subordinate to. And one of the extraordinarily useful ideas about the abstraction of even God as a personified spirit, let's say, is that it allows every leader to be subordinate to something that's beyond him. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be misused, but it's a very, very, very important idea.
Yeah, except you can get there the other way around. You can realize that even if you're at the top of the hierarchy, you are radically dependent on everyone else. The tip of the pyramid.
But everybody at the tip of a hierarchy doesn't believe that. Sometimes they believe that they can do whatever the hell they want.
Yeah, but I'm saying if you're going to believe something that's compatible with rationality globally and has the least conceivable downside, I would put in that place not a superstitious attachment to a notion of an invisible friend or punisher who's above you. I would put in its place the totally defensible and palpably true fact that you could be the king of the world, and you are dependent on everyone around you to eat, to not be murdered by them. I mean, you are. I mean, it's amazing how precarious even a totalitarian regime is. I mean, the amazing thing is that these last at all, because in many cases it would just take 50 people to act in unison to kill the tyrant, right? But it never happens because you just have a first mover problem. Everyone is afraid to be the first person shot. But it is a genuine mystery that these systems even perpetuate themselves. And when they unravel, when you see Gaddafi being murdered in a crowd, you realize, wow, it really is just a matter of the restraint and fear of human beings keeping any of these things together. A benign, if you wanted a hierarchy where you had a kind of a benign philosopher king pulling the reins of a society, I'm not saying we do, but even there, you could have an ethical one. You could have one where, and a non-superstitious one where someone recognized, hey, this is how we're doing it, but we are at the top of this hierarchy, am radically dependent on being surrounded by as many happy people as possible.
Well, look, I mean, I don't, in some profound sense, I don't disagree with that.
We're actually, I mean, this sounds like a fiction, but we're living with this problem. Proud, you realize, wow, it really is just a matter of the restraint and fear of human beings keeping any of these things together. A benign, if you wanted a hierarchy where you had a kind of a benign philosopher king pulling the reins.
Wow, wow, wow. The discussion gets even deeper and deeper and deeper, right? Their discussion is just so stimulating that you literally have to go over it, again, just to try to understand, especially when Jordan Peterson starts talking. Now, sometimes he starts weaving in these stories from, other things, and, he talks about the metaphysical and the physical, and then he talks about the conscious and the unconscious and the subconscious, and then he brings in religion and he brings in philosophy. He just brings in all these things from all over the place, and you're wondering, okay, wait. We got to slow down here, Jordan, or either we got to take what he's talking about, go back, and then re-listen to it. So as he was talking about the Mesopotamian God, and that even the Mesopotamian God in the hierarchy had somebody that was above him, letting him know that he was an absolute. So that's where Sam Harris gets into the picture and says, well, wait a minute. If you're talking about a hierarchy and you're saying that you've got a God figure, then instead of putting in like an invisible like friend or enemy or something else, he's saying to put in something that you could actually tangibly hold and say that this person or entity, whatever that is, it's there, for truth, and that it would like to make as many people around it as happy as possible so it can continue whatever that thing is. And that's why he was saying that in terms of, he just felt like for tyrants and dictators and these brutal regimes, socialism, communism, Stalin, Mao, how were they able to last that long? Because he said all it would take is, he mentioned 50 people, about 50 people. But the thing is, who's going to volunteer to be the first person in through the door and take the first bullet? Not too many people want to sign up for that. But then when it does happen, you look and go, why didn't this happen, years before? But one of the things that these despots, these dictators, these like Hitler and Stalin and Mao and Che and Pol Pot and all these other unbelievable, brutal, evil incarnate men had in common was they were able to put around them a group of people that were similar in their views, and that those people and that those dictators at the time were able to, I don't think relegate, give away power, but allow them to think that they had some semblance of power in their own territory, aka, the generals, the lieutenants, the colonels, those kind of things. People in charge of a ministry, in charge of power, so they had the power there, monetary means as well. They would basically do whatever they wanted within that sphere of influence that they had, still reporting upwards, to the dictator, obviously. But that's what kept those people in line. And then obviously having the military backing, having the weapons, instilling the fear in the people, all of that. Now, Douglas made a point when he was talking about that you can't attribute, all the wars that occurred just to religion, or all the wars that occurred, just to, non-religious factions. You can't attribute everything there. And when he made the faction is that what did all of these brutal regimes, these dictatorships, these evil empires they have in common? Said that they thought that no one was watching them. Well, if you take that logic to its conclusion, my opinion is that means that you're only thinking that the person, that entity that you're not, you don't care if you're being watched, doesn't really care, right? That's my way of thinking. So what? We don't believe in that being, but do we care if somebody's if they're watching or not watching us? But then you go to the other side where Sam Harris said is that, well, what if they think that God is on their side? That the ethnic cleansing that they're doing is because God told them to do that. It's a religious doctrine, In other words, this is what sort of happens with the Islamic Caliphate, or when they talk about the infidels, that the infidels, must be killed. Well, they don't realize, that they're talking about in a historical context that was during when you're warring with the nation state, or someone's invading you and you're retaliating. So there, it's the enemy, right? When we were there, the German in World War I, World War II, take it fact, and we were killing the Germans. We were killing the Japanese. They were the enemies. They were the infidels. They were the ones who attacked. We retaliated, and we were fighting for that. So it's just, again, imagine, how do people distinguish whatever you want to call that figure at the very top that we call God or the Creator? What side does he want? Anyways, folks, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasir, and we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel, like, share, and follow us. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Check out our videos here and here. My final thought is always, when you're right, you're right, and when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.